Hey MBA hopefuls, we are on the air with MBA Waves, your weekly vidcast talking all things business and education, streaming live every Tuesday on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, bringing you tons of tips to help you get into a top rank MBA program. And we're also getting you up and close and personal with many of these schools that we host on the show, where you can get all your questions answered. And if you like this week's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today on episode 113, as we're nearing the beginning of September, right after the summer, and of course right after some of the most important round one deadlines, we are very happy to get into the nitty gritty today. And what are we talking about? The CV. We're going to talk about CV versus business school resume, how important is the CV, and the do's and don'ts for an advert winning resume. As always, I'm your host, Krithika Srinivasan, joined by my co host, Bara Sapir of City Trust Pep and Eric Lucrezia of Candidate Coach. How are you guys doing?
Great. How are you doing?
Amazing and glad to be back after the break. And we have a
Yes.
very special guest today, our friend Cristina Freeman. Christina, a big welcome to you. Could you
Thank
just give us a brief introduction of the lovely stuff that you do?
Okay, thank you. So great to be here. I'm a CV or resume and LinkedIn profile writer, and I am also the founder of the Career Writing Connection. Got my start actually in MBA admissions many years ago at IESC Business School. And then I became an admissions consultant. And about 10 years ago, I decided to continue in this vein because these are fields that overlap quite a bit. And dedicate myself exclusively to writing resumes and LinkedIn profiles. So helping people identify their value and express it and connect to new opportunities, which is basically what MBA admissions consulting does as well. So pleasure to be here.
That's awesome, and we're so happy to have you here too. So I'm going to get right into it. Let's clear up one thing from the beginning. What's the difference between a business school resume and a CV?
Well, I love that question because I could answer it two ways. I could answer saying, well, every CV serves the purpose of connecting you to an opportunity, to an objective. So if you have a CV, if you're in a job search, that CV is connecting you to that specific objective. If you're applying for a business school, the objective is getting into that business school, and it's one component of the entire application. So you should always view it as that. What am I already saying on my application? What am I conveying? And what's missing? So every component of the application is like a brushstroke, of a picture that you're trying to paint of yourself. So when you put it all into, let's say, if you were to analyze all of your, in CV writing, I call it talent, skill, accomplishment inventory, right? To like put it out on the table and say, this is all my inventory. This is what I have. But where do I put it? So it's a little bit like visual merchandising. You want to showcase it. There's some things to put in a window display. There's some things to put in the front of the store, the back of the store. So depending on what the MBA application asks you, then you can use the resume to kind of complement that information, supplement it, complement it, expand upon it. But then the objective there is, okay, the admissions committee, what are they looking for? And what should I highlight in my profile? So that's the difference. The other one is for a job search, for a particular job, a particular industry. So very generally, and we can get into it more if you'd like.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to what Christine has just shared. I mean, I think it's an opportunity for branding, and we've already covered personal branding in another episode of MBA Waves. But if you think about it, I mean, the CV is a really quick snapshot of your whole career, right? Often on just one page, as certain schools like HBS, Harvard only wants one page. Other schools will limit it to two, but it's a real quick synopsis of everything. And this is a way to, first of all, demonstrate the skill of getting to the point, of having big impact with a little bit, with minimal resources, in this case space, real estate, as we say in the industry. But it is a way to deliver something about what is your brand. When you submit your application, the CV is almost always the very first thing that the admissions committee is going to look at to get an overview of who is this person before they get into the application, the essays, the references, all those other pieces. So you really want to hit them with the messaging that you want to deliver. That is part of your brand. But I would also argue that you have this opportunity for branding with your MBA CV well before you actually submit the application officially. And all the interactions that you have with the admissions committee, recruiters at MBA fairs, by email, with alumni, you probably would and should share your CV from the beginning as just a kind of courtesy, because they're going to ask you for it straight away anyway. So save them the trouble, show them that you get it, and share that. And this is a way to start conveying your personal brand as an MBA applicant well before you submit.
Yeah, no, good point. I really like that a lot. It's and also the exercise of it is kind of like you're getting yourself ready to give your elevator pitch. Just putting the pieces together. If you really do a value proposition, let's say a CV is a value proposition. That's what it is. It's not a description of like your job titles and all that. Otherwise, it's not hard to differentiate. So the exercise of doing that, if you're just getting started, looking at MBA programs, like you're kind of, it gets you ready to give that quick elevator pitch if you have the opportunity to do so. Say who you are and the value that you're bringing, what your objective is, so where you're going, why you want an MBA. So that's great. It's a glance, right? And so there might be parts of the application that say, that ask you to like type in, okay, well, your job, the company, the title, the date. That's, it comes up on the, and then you have an essay that asks you about your career goals. And there's another opportunity for you to say where you're going and connect it to where you've been. But then on the CV, it's that quick glance at every opportunity, to every job that you've had, to understand that you've been able to reflect upon and separate activity versus value, right? So an activity is one thing. You do this activity to produce what, right? To produce what kind of outcomes. And the more aware you are of that, also the better your application will be overall in your interview. You're aware about the value that you bring, that you influence outcomes, and how so. So the things to draw out, back to the question, what's the difference? Well, I'm tailoring it for an MBA program, for the MBA admissions committee. What is the admissions committee looking for? Just like if you're tailoring it for a job, what are that company's pain points, right? What are their needs, and how can I respond to their needs? So for the MBA Ambitious Committee, we know they're looking for leadership potential. So if you've had leadership potential that you've demonstrated and you're not saying so on your resume, then you're missing an opportunity there. Leadership potential, if you've had promotions, if you've worked on teams, and because they're thinking, okay, I need someone for my MBA program that is going to contribute to the MBA program. They're also thinking about the recruiters, right? So they're thinking about, okay, 1 year, 2 years out, how will this person interview? They say they want to, I don't know, they're an engineer and they want to get into project management and infrastructure, on infrastructure projects. Well, let's see what they say about that. How does that connect? So they're thinking about the recruiters that come to their school to recruit people like you. They're also thinking about you. It's kind of like, I know that you guys working in this, I probably say this a lot. It's like kind of like a marriage, because that brand is with you forever. Like if you decide to go to that MBA and you're with them forever, you're part of their alumni forever. So it's a big deal. That first glance to say, here I am, and this is what I can showcase. But that's the big difference there. You're speaking directly to that MBA admissions committee and what they're looking for. And so,
Cristina, you raised a really important point by saying that they also want to know about, employers, recruiters post-degree, right? The admissions committee wants to make sure that you're employable in the sector and industry and function that you claim that you want to work in post-degree, right? That you're going to be able to succeed in that, right? So important too.
Right. So it's like connecting the dots. If I say on my application, using the same example, I'm an engineer and I work on infrastructure projects, and you've already had some exposure to leading a team or to training a team, or to thinking about the business side of those infrastructure projects and billing and in mid-project changes or whatever. These are really interesting things, rather than just saying that you're an engineer, right? What does that say? How does that differentiate you? And so connecting the dots for them and say, I've really thought about it. I've really thought about what I'm doing now and how that can connect. And that it's also, like I like to say to my CV and LinkedIn profile clients, so it's so hard. It's such an intimidating position to be in when you say, I'm looking for a job. I am looking for the job, or I'm looking for an MBA program. But in fact, your future employer is also looking for you, or your future MBA program is also looking for you. So your job is to make it easier for them to find you and to assess the value that you have. And that's through all these different tools, and the CV being just one part of the application, which is actually really cool. Because you get to say, you don't just get one page, you get one page for the CV, But then they're going to read an application. You don't get that for jobs. For jobs, you just get that quick glance, and that maybe it goes through a scanning software. So it's actually a great opportunity here for an MBA application.
I love the metaphor that you use about painting, right? That each of the pieces are painting, because when you think about it, there's so many different ways to paint, right? Like you could have watercolor, or you could have gouache, or you could have oil painting, and the fact that each of these different things that you're talking about have to work cohesively as a whole. And so it's like seeing forest for trees, like you're seeing the brush strokes, and you get to decide what that brush stroke, what the temperament and what the texture is of each of those entries, right?
Yeah.
And
Love
so
it.
you actually have a lot of flexibility, because you know who the end reader is. And you're also, as you're talking about, you're also thinking about it in the future, what Eric was talking about, like how are future employees, how are they going to look at it through these different lenses? And so you can really have a lot of, I don't want to say, it's not that it's creativity, it's more like adaptability and flexibility with how you present these
No,
different.
I love it. I might have to use that. About that, because I was just thinking brushstrokes, like the colors and the picture you're putting together. But you're right. There's different ways of presenting that. Sometimes I say words because that's what I work with, and I love the power that words have, that we can choose
Absolutely.
them. There are things that we can't choose. Like the experience you've had is experience that you've had. You can't erase it. You can't. But how you present it, the value that you give it, the words that you choose to describe it, that's all in your control. And like painting, like you were saying, that are you going to use watercolors? Are you going to use another kind of paint? Are you going to do more like impressionist, like every little dot, every detail gets into a bigger picture?
Yeah.
So it's you get to decide that. Where do you want the focus to go? Where do you want that focus to go? Because we drag around something that we don't need anymore. We have to say it. Okay, I did this, and this, but I'm a career changer, and I'm going in that direction. So I want to put the focus on what connects me with that objective.
And how are you going to draw the reader into it? I mean, admittedly, my graduate degree in art history is showing up right now. Admittedly, but I think it's really an apt point. And I don't think that you need to be a liberal arts major applying to business school to really understand that it's layered, and there's a surface and there's a depth. I mean, it's a great metaphor.
Yeah,
personally.
no, I like it. That's great. And I think that all of it in the MBA application, CV anyway, all that self-awareness, that I know that when people work with coaches, they talk about this. Okay, tell me more about this job. And there are people miss opportunities. I love this in MBA admissions consulting. I love this about my work, that people just say very generally what they've done, but they don't dig deep enough, or they don't realize how interesting they are. How are they going to compete with everyone else? And they have these GMAT scores, or they have these really fancy job titles, and I've just done this. And you've asked a little bit, I'm always amazed. Like, why didn't you say that? Why didn't you say that? I'll go back to I'll tell you about my first client in MBA admissions consulting. This was, I don't want to date myself, okay? But this person was for an executive program, and he thought, well, it was someone from Romania living in the United States and going for an executive MBA, and saying that all of the Americans have so many extracurricular activities, I just can't compete with them. I have nothing to say. I have nothing to say. And then it turned out that when communism ended, he ran for office for mayor of his city. I said, why is playing varsity soccer more interesting than that? Right?
Yeah.
Why do you think of saying that? So that's what I love. Like, people, if you dig down deep, these are things to say in your CV, or if you think about if your application, there's no place for something like that in your application, there's like a section in your CV you can bring that into, right? And there's some programs have a template that they ask you to use. They ask you to follow certain guidelines, but you can, if not, there's always an additional information section. You can throw things in there.
You're so right. I mean, I find the majority of my clients, the people that I work with, undervalue so many aspects of their story, their experiences, perhaps their family history, personality, whatever, that are really some of the best selling points that they could and should include in their CV and their essays and so forth. And that's, I think, the benefit of working with somebody that is that mirror before you to help reflect back, like, hey, this is interesting, this you running for mayor, for example. And you mentioned self-awareness. I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to let someone else take over.
So I'm going to say I'm just loving the metaphors. You said it's a store, and then Bara brought in the brush strokes. And Eric is bringing in the mirror. Keep
Yeah,
going.
great. Yeah. No, that's true, because that's what you're helping the person see, what's really there and not what they think is there. And digging down deep, like I do it for resume, it helps, and for application too. Challenge, action, result, or situation, action, result. For each job, don't just tell me what you did. That's the activity. But the activity produces a value. And so what was the challenge you took on? That talks about a scope that you're able to manage, the actions that you implemented, and then the result. And then there's a way to kind of like do that visual merchandising and move things around to attract the reader's attention. And this is one thing important for a CV, and I'll bring this in, that it doesn't happen on the application as much because there's more text. But a CV, because they read, a recruiter reads CVs so fast, or an admissions committee will read the CV so fast, it's very important to keep in mind how one reads. Right? Would you want to read your CV? Ask yourself that. If you cram too much information in, and we read in a capital F shape, and I always tell people there's lots of ways to remember the letter F, capital F. You want to think about a certain phrase people use. You can think about my last name. You can think of that phrase, or you can think of my last name, capital F. And when you see studies of where people pause on a document, we pause in a capital F shape. So at the top and to the left. And so key information, you can move key information and keywords to be sure that you get the reader's attention. A lot of MBA CVs don't have a headline because there are a lot of career changers. It's really hard to like pin down a headline. Like if somebody is already more established in a career, they might have their headline senior executive medical devices, for example. And so that kind of situates the reader. But if you don't use a headline, you do have the summary at the top, 3 lines or in bullets, make it really fast, big impact. And then to the left of the CV, you can always start your sentences with the impact, switch around how you say things, and bold some of the keywords to guide the reader along. So that's one thing to think about in how you write the information. The rest of the document is pretty standard for business schools. So they expect if you're not studying currently and you're looking for admission to an MBA program, we'll probably start with your current work experience, and then education. And then after that, you can do additional information. Then when you're in the MBA program, things will switch around when they, for their career services, and education will go at the top. But that top part, that's your choice. That's your showcase. You decide what you're going to say there. It's in your control. You don't have to say everything that you did. You have to say what's relevant to your audience.
Yes.
I have to.
You spoke about. Sorry, really quickly, because I got cut off when I was choking a moment ago, and I'll turn it back over to Bara. Sorry. First of all, I love the F metaphor. Speaking of metaphors, it's a great way to remember, and I'll think of fun and other words that start with F. But it's totally true. The way people read a page, you get so much from the top, across the top, and kind of going vertically down on staying on the left side. So that's really where you want to put. That's strategic placement, I would say. Being self-aware, but also knowing your audience. And when I say that, you're thinking about the position of the admissions committee, and what are the things they're looking for? They're looking for leadership experiences in a variety of forms. They're looking for teamwork experiences. They're looking for international exposure. And all of these things come in a variety of forms. And some of those things you really want to highlight in that F, especially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah, what was I thinking? Oh, I was thinking that you don't know this, Cristina, but you might not know. I have a speed reading program that we created it's an online DIY, and I'm like, oh, this is a whole new market. People who read resumes and CVs, because how do you read faster but get in all the information? So it's interesting. It's a whole new market that I should explore.
Oh, that's so cool.
I'll talk to you offline about it, but
yeah, no, that's exciting.
I'm also curious that because it feels like it's almost the tagline, this branding that you're talking about at the top. I'm wondering, is that the place where if there's new information that if you're updating your CV that's the most important thing to change, or what are some of the most important things to keep in mind if you are changing?
Yeah. Okay. So if traditionally most recruiters, and I assume that for most business schools, they want a traditional chronological format. So that's great because it allows them to see your timeline really fast at a glance. What happens is for like a career changer, it sometimes leaves them a little bit stuck because the first impression at the top might not be where they want to go. So that's how you can use the summary. I like calling it the window display. You know, what's the first thing you see? A window display before you walk into a store. And that gives you the flexibility to pull anything from a previous experience. So like if you have a tagline, a branding statement, or, 5 years of experience in whatever, you can pull something up that happened before. Let's say you want to change industries. Let's say you work in, I don't know, in data analysis, you're a business analyst, and you want to apply that more to marketing, and that you haven't done that yet. And it was like, I don't know, a few years ago, you can always pull something from that follows to the bottom of the page chronologically and say it in that window display. And to not get too wordy, those window displays, like that summary at the top, it used to be a paragraph, and people used to read a paragraph. We don't really read paragraphs anymore. Only when you're reading a novel, maybe. So I usually try to keep it to no more than 3 lines if you're going to write paragraph style,
or bullet points.
Or bullet points, or you can do like 1 sentence branding statement and then examples of your key accomplishments. That's very differentiating. And another thing that I know that there's a lot of debate, and there's no anything set in stone about it, but there's like a debate. Well, should I talk more about my soft skills or my hard skills, or what should I do? And I don't know what your opinion is on your end, but I feel that so many people just say, without backing things up, say that they have all these soft skills, and I think they're very hard to really evaluate on a CV. So to be differentiating, I always say you can mention the soft skill, but if there's nothing to back it up, go a little bit heavier on your hard skills when you're describing yourself. Or back it up. Say if you're a good people person and that you successfully trained, I don't know how many people in Power BI, and to help the company migrate to their services, their programs. So yeah, I don't know what your take is on this, but I find, or recruiters might get frustrated because otherwise everybody's summary reads exactly the same. Team player, and this and that. You can prove it in your essay, prove it later in your essay, because you have more space also in the essays to discuss examples. So, and another thing that I think is about, this goes back to middle school writing. I don't know who remembers when your teacher was teaching you how to write an essay. Same thing applies to CVs, is don't just tell me, show me, right? So quantify what you can quantify, because numbers are so easy to evaluate. Not everything lends itself to quantifying. Yet there's an impact, so at least think about the impact. And show me. Don't just tell me.
I have a question about. I've got a question. What happens if you're working for a company or you've worked for a company that is not in like the graces of modern, like what's happening in the modern world? Like, let's say you're like, I worked for the KGB, or I worked for, and I can't even think of any, like even if you think of like, I'm working for, Meta, or which doesn't have, the same kind of thing, but I'm like Elon Musk is my boss, or something that is interesting, but like is like fallen from grace in particular. Like Ernie Madoff was my supervisor,
someone working for Philip Morris or a large tobacco company.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So
the Trump administration.
Exactly. I mean, for some people that might be okay, but I wonder, how do you kind of lower that? Like, do you kind of like make the paint stroke really big, but have the place really small?
Yeah, maybe here is, what do you want to highlight? So you can't change where you worked. It's impossible if you worked where you worked, and what would you got valuable experience out of that job, no matter what, no matter if that organization is bankrupt after all the lawsuits, or it just has so much negative press. It doesn't matter. That experience still is good, and is how you value it, how you view it.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can do, like you were saying, is instead of what's more important? All of us have things we can show off that are easy to recognize. Sometimes it's the company where you work, the case it's well known. So you're an analyst at McKinsey. Well, everybody knows McKinsey, and it's already like just says a lot just with the name, right? And other times you worked at an unknown company or a startup that nobody knows, but what you've done, either your title is really cool or like your accomplishments are really cool. So you can decide what to highlight, what to put to the left. So maybe you want to put your job title to the left in the cases that that Bara is bringing to the table at Enron or wherever it is that you work, and then maybe don't highlight the name of the company, but highlight your position and highlight everything else. And if nothing else, it's too bad if somebody isn't aware of their own, let's say, prejudice, because it's really interesting. Oh, well, what was that like? Working for that company or working for that politician.
But don't tell them how many people you killed.
Right? Yeah, right.
Keep that out.
Yeah. For CIA, you probably had like a cover anyway, right?
It's very unlikely that somebody who's at the age and level of experience is applying for an MBA, like 20s to 30s, is going to be somebody who would have been at the position of power to have that negative impact, right? Like Donald Trump is way too old to apply for an MBA, and whoever's ran Enron would have been
Stephen
too
Miller.
senior. Stephen Miller. Very unlikely, I'm saying. There can be exceptions, but highly unlikely. But what the likely situation is that you did learn things. And what did you take away from that experience? Sometimes it's about a negative experience that you took away some hard lessons of like, this is not how I want to run an organization. These are not the ethical principles that I abide by. This is not the kind of sustainability model that I could prescribe to. And so I think there's value in that. And what you can bring to the classroom conversation about, these are the mistakes that I worked under. I think if you can frame it that way,
or even if like there are probably things beyond those mistakes that are very valuable. And I think that's everything is how you shed light on your experience. And that maybe takes us to another point. That's one of the mistakes, is getting too worried about comparing, feeling insecure about whatever job that you've done, either because of your title or because company that you worked for, rather than what you actually did. So I think there's sometimes this obsession with the recommendations on the MBA application. Well, if I get the really big boss to write it for me, then it carries more weight, but the big boss doesn't really know what to say about you. Yeah. So the same thing with your job titles, like to be careful. You don't have to, you are who you are, and you're much more than your job title. So much more than your job title, and so much more than the company that you worked for. It's everything else there. So, but yeah, that's a good point. We're much more than that.
So, Cristina, maybe we can get into a little bit of the nitty gritty about formatting and number of pages, some things that you really recommend, some real good tips that people can take away from this episode with.
Yeah, well, in the job search world, it's one thing, and there's so much debate, and that's really hard to sort through all the noise, because you hear, 1 page, 2 pages. No, like in Europe, especially no picture. In the US and UK, in Anglo-Saxon countries, there's no picture anyway, so there's not a debate. Now, for an MBA application, there's first, if they give you a template, then that's easy, right? Or if they tell you 1 page, please give me a 1-page CV, solved. If they don't, and they leave it up to you, oftentimes for recruiters, once you're in an MBA program, most have a 1-pager for their CV book in exactly the same format. But you going in have a bit more flexibility if they haven't given you a template. And the rule of thumb is more than 5 years of experience, you can go to 2 pages, right? If somebody, now these are full-time MBA candidates, so they probably don't have as much experience as some of the other clients that I work with that are 20 years, that they still do 2 pages, because you should be able to synthesize what you do. So if you think, well, but I can't fit it in, but your filter is what's relevant to the committee, what's relevant to the admissions committee, not I have to say everything. This is not your career history in every single internship that you've ever done. You can have a little section of early career and just, one-liners, or just the title and the dates, and then expand upon that which is relevant to the admissions committee. So, so in terms of the format, I would keep it simple. There's some really cool templates out there on Canva and lots of other sites that I would stay away from for some reason, the 2 columns are really popular now, especially this narrow column to the left. So keeping the F shape in mind, I would stay away from that kind of format. If you like the columns, then maybe find one where the narrow column with less relevant, important information is to the right and not to the left, where you have the reader's attention. I really like, if you can, to have that headline at the top. But this is a market that it's a little bit harder to establish that headline, because you might be changing careers. So don't worry too much about it. And I've seen, I think Marlena Corcoran had an article in Forbes saying, hey, LBS knows, and they have a template that they recommend, and that one has no headline at all. It's very simple, very to the point. Other formatting things, little rules of thumb. We don't want to cram everything in. Think about back to my visual merchandising metaphor. Like if you go shopping and you go by a store that has so many things crammed into the window display, what does it say to you? Nothing. It says nothing, right? And if you walk in, like, where are the high ticket items? At the front of the store, and everything can breathe, and you have time to think about things, and you take in a certain image. So don't cram it all in. Don't use less than 10.5 font. Keep your bullet points to 2 lines.
Minimum.
Yeah, a minimum. That's no smaller than 10.5. Like if you can do 12, then all the better. Think about the reader. I also like doing between one bullet and the next, doing half a space so that those sentences breathe. They're not all crammed on top of each other. Yeah. And then also be sure that your margins are adequate. In centimeters, since I live in Europe, I think I do 1.7 all around, 1.7 top, bottom, left, right. And I forget what that is in inches. So sorry, folks in the US.
1.7 centimeters is roughly a half an inch, I guess.
Yeah.
Negative space, you're talking Bara's language, but I'm like a huge fan. Like I make the comparison between like the Cheesecake Factory menu. We have so many things crammed in there, you can't figure out what you're looking at, to the advertisement that Steve Jobs used to put for Apple, where it'd be like a full page New York Times ad with just the Apple logo in the middle and all that negative space. You cannot miss what's important.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
2 extreme examples, but to make the point.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can do. Sorry?
Lululemon, though, if you think about, I don't know, Lululemon,
Yes.
I don't know how you pronounce that. They also like they've got like that just word thing happening, but the whole thing is that. But your storefront, I think, is a really important point, because you walk by a store that's got a ton of stuff, you just zone out. You just completely, you don't take it in.
It's too busy.
It's too much.
Yeah, it says, by saying everything, you say nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And it's really tiring for the reader. And so really put yourself in. And there's a clip from Modern Family that I like using in some of the CV webinars, where Mitchell is reluctantly going to Costco. He's like, oh gosh, I go to Costco. I'm not going to find anything, Cameron. I mean, I'm not going to find. And it turns out he finds everything he's looking for, and he can't believe it, because he's like, oh my gosh, look at this, the shredder. It's right where I was looking for it. And so like, you want the recruiter to feel like Mitchell, that like they're finding everything they need right away, effortlessly. No digging around, no interpreting, no having to deduce things, just put it right out there. And remember, you don't have to say everything. What you can do as an exercise is have a 2-pager with all of your content, and then take a step back and think, is it relevant to my audience? No, off. Gosh, I have 10 bullet points under this job, and I was only there for two years. Do I need 10 bullet points under this job? Off. Or organize it a little bit under categories, like a hybrid resume is not functional, not chronological. It's within the chronological framework, but then you can put like, okay, in marketing and sales, I did this. In process improvement, I did that, to help the reader along. Just like in a store, where are the baking needs in the store? If I don't have a sign, baking needs are here. I don't know. I'm not going to be able to find it.
And even pulling back, I would imagine
the context of
go
ahead,
I would just imagine bullets that shouldn't be like stars or swirlies, right? You want to keep.
Yeah.
You want
simple.
You're not applying for the job of art teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, besides the goal of applying for an MBA, I mean, industry, country, culture, all of these things influence what your CV is going to look like. Or the fact that we call it a resume in North America and the rest of the world CV, there's also the cultural aspect. People who are working as an engineer, it's normal to have this 5, 6, 7-pager because you include every project with all the details of that project. If you're applying for another engineering job, they need to understand these things. Applying to business school, A, they don't understand it. B, they don't care. Like they want to see like the leadership aspect of it because MBA is leadership training, basically. So,
and I wanted to,
go ahead.
I wanted to add like one more point and a story. I had a person cram a 4-page CV using a font size of 4 into 1 page.
No, it's like microfiche. Talking about the KGB, that is microfiche.
Yeah. They're probably in white, also invisible, right, for the ATS. The applicant tracking systems or something in the back there. Yeah, I have seen people really cram everything in, and why not put yourself in someone's shoes? Would you want to read that? Really? Would you want to read that? No, you wouldn't.
No.
So why would you think that someone else is going to read it and be able to draw any conclusions from the value that
P.S. P.S. No MBA hopeful today knows what the KGB or microfiche are anyway.
Oh, I love hearing these things. Oh, I love that there are the people that know what microfiches.
Yeah.
Well, what they will know is those games that you see online where there's just letters and it's like pick the first word and that's what your week is going to be like, right? You ever see those? And like if you find a word, you can't have your CV be that experience for the reader, right? Like you can't have just the word pop out because there's so many words.
Make it a pleasant experience, and it's hard. Well, what should I choose? And another thing that I think this came up recently is about promotions. Like, okay, so what is the MBA admissions committee? What proves that you have managerial potential? So I've seen some people who, I don't know, have like they're at the same company for 5 years, and let's say they're associate whatever, and I say, oh, but there's a gap. What did you do before? Oh, I was promoted, but I was like an intern first, and then I was just like a coordinator. It's like, no, but if you structure such a way that at a glance someone knows it, you were already promoted. There's been career advancement. You didn't just start as that, and then there's something about a gap. So if you've had that in the same company, be sure you say it. Don't say, well, the only important thing I've done is in the last part of it. And there's different ways to structure that so you don't take up too much space. You can even do it on the same line as the company and then write the 3 positions that you've held and what years on the same line, and then focus on which positions have brought the most value to your profile and bring the most value to the program.
Let's not forget that our LinkedIn profiles are usually listed on the CV, right? And so they have this complement to your CV. So this is all the detail in a much more almost like flamboyant way that LinkedIn is to fill in those gaps if you really want to focus on what is relevant. And by the way, you can title the section of your experience as relevant professional experience, which signals that you're not necessarily saying everything.
I love it. That you can say, relevant, and that's for career changer. Yeah, it might be really helpful. Or someone with a portfolio career that's hard of these very rigid structures of chronological CV are difficult, but there's lots of ways. And LinkedIn, you have 2,000 characters in each job. You have tons of space to elaborate more. You have the about section. Also, you get 2,000 characters there if you want to do a bit more branding. But that glance, this is value at a glance, at a quick glance. What do you want this person? What is the impression you want to give this person? I like to stay away from like all those cliche, all the too many adjectives, right? That everyone uses, right? It's successful. Of course it was successful, but if you tell me the number from this to that already says it's successful, and everyone says successful. So why take up the space? So that's another tip. If you need to reduce words, maybe read the sentence and see what words it can do without losing the impact of the sentence. And some of those words often are too many adjectives, which are like salt and sugar. They're flavor enhancers when used selectively, but like when you use too much salt or too much sugar, it drowns out all the flavors. So that's a good way to reduce 3 lines to 2. It's like go through and see, too many adjectives, and get rid of that. In terms of formatting, you said about funny colors and things like that if you're in a creative industry, maybe for a job, you'd want to have something with a bit more oomph, more graphic.
You're in marketing, if you're in like an entrepreneur, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Versus accounting, finance.
Right. But for an
Do you have a
MBA,
preference for when you're using verbs? Do you have a preference for past simple or gerunds? So for those who aren't grammar nerds like myself,
okay, that's a great question.
verbs that end in ed, like helped, nurtured, trained, sustained, built, versus ing verbs, right? So working at, how do you do it?
No, that's a great question, especially for non-native English speakers. Or I find this more here in Europe, that people might be using the gerund, or for example, people who have written a resume in Spanish. Here in Spain, they start with a noun instead of with a verb. So the
French
verb
too,
should, yeah, they start with a noun, right? Like so always in English, a verb, and it should be a present simple or simple past. If you're currently doing it in the present, if not simple past, and that's it. It's and there's lots of great resources. And this is another thing, another tip about getting people's attention, why you need to vary the vocabulary, strong action verbs, and you don't need to exaggerate over the top. But if you vary the vocabulary, it helps the reader. So all these little tricks, like for example, get someone else to proofread it, because those little mistakes that you think are just not a big deal. I'm writing it's a possessive or a contraction, and I messed it up. I switched it around. I put the apostrophe in the wrong place. It trips up the reader who's reading really fast. That's why grammar is important and spelling is important. So always have someone else, because spell check isn't going to pick that up because it's correct. It's whether it's possessive without an apostrophe or with an apostrophe. And there's great resources. The Muse has really good, like has a whole list of action verbs. There's tons of sites, the Resume Writing Academy. And to vary it helps the reader, enriches the message that you're giving. So if you're like develop, well, I'm a software developer, I developed, and I don't know what else I did. You did other things. So right, you spearheaded the project. You led a group in overhauled, migrated a system. There's lots of ways to vary the vocabulary so that at a glance everything and it makes for better reading. And
Yeah, which reminds me, like no KGB code or jargon.
I love it. Yes. People get so entrenched in their company, and then they have all these acronyms, and nobody else knows what they mean.
That brings up this idea of, like, when you look at different folks that you work with from different countries, do you find that there's certain trends, like from your folks that come from Spain versus people who come from France versus people from, like, I'm just looking around the room, India, the United States, like, are there things that you see, like maybe there's expletives from, or superlatives from Americans, like it was the best, but...
Well, I do a little bit here, and I think, but it might not apply, and you guys might have more insight about this, the younger generation that is used to social media. And social media is a place where you put yourself out there a lot. You're constantly putting yourself out there. But here in Europe, maybe people who are mid-career and more senior don't feel nearly as comfortable as an American does, and they feel like they're showing off if they say, they're tooting their own horn too much, whereas they really need to do a bit more. And then maybe some people in the U.S. there's like too many adjectives. It's like, come on, tune it down. Let's get to the chase. So I find that for Europeans, sometimes I tune down my American instincts to show off, or I say, you need to do more of this. If you don't feel comfortable with it, we can take it back just a little bit, but you have to put yourself out there and do a little bit more of tooting your own horn, because if you don't say it, it doesn't exist. If you didn't say it, it never happened, right? So you have to be aware of what you did and say it. If not, forget it. How are they going to know, right, that you got that prize? Or how are they going to know that you ran for office? How are they going to know that you trained that many people, that you are able to train? So these are the things to think about. Ask yourself those questions.
There's such a cultural range of what's considered bragging and what's considered being too shy, and there's that sweet spot. And I don't know, an MBA is kind of a Western invention. It is an American thing at its origin. So that is in its DNA, so to speak, of speaking clearly about your achievements, about what you've done and so forth. And it should be in a way that is factual and not gloating or bragging, that is ideally how, but I know it culturally can be, very uncomfortable for people from certain countries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I think you can get accustomed to, and you should.
Good point. Like, to be factual, but you really did that, and that's really important. And now you're stepping into a leadership role, and you need to have demonstrated that leadership. So you need to get used to that. And there is that line between showing off and then just really understanding your value and not being scared to put it out there. And that's and then that feeds into what you're projecting about yourself.
And that comes back to self-awareness and self-confidence. I feel like people that are uncomfortable speaking about their achievements, they're almost intimidated by their own self. Like, this person that I've actually become, you haven't caught up with what you've actually achieved at an emotional level.
Yeah, maybe an imposter syndrome. Sometimes that imposter
something like
syndrome.
that.
Yet they're striving for an MBA, so they know that they're striving for more, right? So they need to kind of get everything in alignment.
For sure, and that speaks to emotional intelligence, which schools very much are looking for. I mean, you hear, like, M7 schools speaking about that all the time, that they pride themselves in that they seek candidates and students that have this, and that they nourish this emotional intelligence even more as they will be graduating and becoming leaders in companies. So very important.
I love that point, because I always think much beyond the format. The format is like, I don't want to say it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's a no-brainer when you've been reading resumes for a long time. Like, these little tips, like, okay, no more than 2 lines, make your font legible, make something that somebody wants to read. There are these good guidelines, but the content is the hardest part. And I think that's the thing to pound out with all that self-awareness that you're talking about, Eric. And I spent a long time on that part. Like, okay, but why? Why did you do that? How many people? And what made it interesting? Or these questions like, what do you love about your work? Because then you can talk about it. And so I always say that document, that first, all those self-awareness exercises, challenge, action, result, or situation, action, result, or whatever it is. Before, after is another one. When I started my job, this was the situation. After I left my job, this, and this had happened. Whatever the exercises are, that's like understanding and getting a good grasp of all of your experience, accomplishment, talent, skill, inventory. And then you decide what to put on your CV, what to put on your application, what to put on your LinkedIn profile, but have like that document. It's just your inventory. And then something stay in the stockroom for some other day, for some other time. But to pounding that out, that's the key. And everything else comes from like reducing the writing, going through and like, okay, how can I make the sentence shorter? How can I organize it? What am I going to put in the summary? But knowing yourself, that takes you. I find that most people find it daunting at first to sit down and do all those kinds of exercises about each job. But once they've done it, they feel so good. They feel so good. It's like, wow, I did all that. Yeah, you did do all that.
Cristina, what do you think about people who are coming from non-traditional, so to speak, or non-business backgrounds? Is there something that you would advise them at the CV level?
Okay. So sometimes they feel more intimidated, right? You didn't follow a track, and they're feeling like, oh gosh. But there's so much value that an MBA program is going to get out of them, because they can't have a whole class full of engineers. They can't have a whole class full of, consulting analysts or finance people. So I think that they also, why do they want to do an MBA? First of all, that. And secondly, to do that insight about all the things that you've done. So for example, let's see, someone who does data analysis. So the activity, again, separating the activity from the value. Data analysis. Well, I run these programs and I analyze data and I run reports, right? But why do you run reports? What do you like about running the reports? Well, then I make recommendations and I discover it's like detective work. Actually, it's like detective work. I find out why this company is losing money, and so when you bring that perspective to what you're doing. Now, if it's something more artistic, let's say, but there's managerial, there's leadership in nonprofit organizations, and there's leadership and teamwork on anything, and there's objectives that need to be met and projects that need to be coordinated and organized and managed. So I think it's saying that management is something that cuts across all kinds of organizations. And that's what you need to focus on, not what you're missing. Oh, I don't know. Well, that's what you're doing in MBA too, if you need to know more about finance and accounting and marketing. Why do you need to know that already? Otherwise, you wouldn't do an MBA, but you have all these other things. Getting a project off the ground, right? Planning events.
We're getting towards the end of the program. There's a couple more quick questions I want to ask you before we wrap it up. It's been really interesting. Just wanted to know, this has kind of been burning in my mind. What's your take on the whole, like, for me, I call it personal interest. Some people call it extracurricular. I find that term kind of childish, but that section where it's like more than the professional and the education. Do you have just really quickly anything to say about that?
Sure. And I think when you're looking for a job, there's like the debate. There's all these debates out there. There's like some recruiters like it, some don't. But I think for an MBA, I think that you need to have that section. That's a good opportunity. You might have it on your application. You have that. Tell me anything else that you haven't said in the other essays. You can say that there. But I think at the bottom, since we're talking about at a glance, your brand at a glance, your value at a glance, then that says something about you. And it's an icebreaker too. It can be, and something that there's resumes I've read for MBA students, watchmaking. Like something totally random, like, oh, wow, interesting. Well, because my family and, whatever. Or I really like Muay Thai. Well, tell me about Muay Thai. What is Muay Thai? I don't know how to pronounce it. The Thai. Or
Muay Thai,
I love reading. I don't just love reading. My favorite book is blah, blah, blah. These are good icebreaker and show that you're so definitely included. When in doubt, included.
Good to know. I totally agree. Krithika, you want to wrap it up? Take us home.
Yeah, sure. So Cristina, what are the top 3 mistakes that people shouldn't be doing on their MBA resume?
Okay. I think that you hit on one of them that was really good, Krithika. Forefront or saying too much and saying nothing at all. That's one big one. Another one is not taking the opportunity to balance out your application, to say, okay, you've said this on your application. So you can expand upon it and be sure it's in alignment with your application. So this is your stated goal in your essay. You want to get into project management. Well, then that's what you can highlight on your CV, right? So the mistake is not using the opportunity to balance your application, saying too much, and I think someone was saying that surprise like sung in a church choir. Cool. And another thing is that people get really nervous and intimidated and overly focused on their job titles and their and the companies, or they feel a little bit tempted to over exaggerate what they've done, and you don't have to. I mean, what you've done is probably much cooler than you think. So know that you're much more than your job, and you're much more than your job title. So I would say that those are the 3: saying too much and not saying anything, not balancing your MBA application, bringing new information in, repeating everything that you've said in your MBA application. And the third one would be to keep it and very rooted in your self-awareness and who you are and the value that you have, and don't worry about titles and things like that. There's lots of other ones, but I think that the format and spelling and all these things are, I don't want to say it's obvious, but it's like going to an interview with your wrinkled pants and, I don't know, spinach in between your teeth. Just check, look in the mirror before you go. Check in the mirror and be sure you don't want to distract people.
Wow.
Self-aware.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think we could go talking about this topic. And Cristina, we would love to have you again. I think there's so much to talk about.
Absolutely.
In terms
I love talking about it. I hope I didn't go, say too much. I hope I said everything that you wanted, your priorities, covered the basics, because I love talking about CVs and MBA, aspiring MBAs, people accessing new opportunities. It's a great place to be and really exciting.
Yeah, and thanks for portraying the CV as a window display, as you called it, and asking us to let the sentences breathe, and of course, not having spinach in your teeth.
Yeah.
I think that went very well. But that's all the time that we have for today's episode. I want to thank our guest, whom we hope we'll be having again, Cristina, for her wonderful, insightful views. And to all our guests in the audience, Marlena, Thomas, thank you so much for the wonderful comments. Such a pleasure to hear from you always. MBA hopefuls, if you like today's episode, please give us a little thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves to stay on top of all the latest trends and news in the world of MBA's business and education. Finally, don't forget to check us out next week, same time, same place. And for full access of upcoming and past episodes, head on to MBAwaves.com. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.